Hey everyone, whoa, there we are. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training as I adjust my camera momentarily here. Welcome to day 5 of the JavaScript training session. We actually kind of have a bonus. So Leland, we've been looking at the schedule and we've determined that the training is so good and the questions are so good and I'm not very sharp. So Leland frequently has to repeat things for me, which actually helps those of you out there who are also stuck, but you don't want to be embarrassed by saying anything. So I'm just taking the hit for you. I go, I don't understand. And he has to repeat it. So we're going to add an extra day because it's going to take longer to get through the content. So at any rate, I sent an email out to everyone over the weekend with the information, the latest information that we have, because we are recording these. So if I go to the fmtraining.tv website, which is where you keep track of all the great daily FileMaker training. Where every day, Monday through Friday, we're broadcasting here on Twitch, YouTube, and Discord in high definition. And these are being recorded, which is great. There's a little bit of lag time between the time we record in a show and then when the taped version, that's an old school, most of you don't even know what tape is, but taped version, recorded version is posted to the internet for you. So if you come over here to JavaScript training, you can see that you can register. This will give you a reminder of what's going on, reminder that the event's coming up. You do this once and it will remind you for the rest of the 10 days. If you want to watch, this is what the link was over the weekend. You can come over here, press the button here, and you can see the current recordings as they are posted in here. Day 3 is supposed to be recorded. So this is Tuesday of last week, Wednesday last week, Thursday and Friday last week are still to be loaded in here. So you can play these and watch these. If you are not a JavaScript person, as of right now, and you want to learn the basics and beginnings, I highly recommend you go back to day 1. Go back to day 1, and because some people are like, yeah, that was really simple. You guys aren't very smart. I'm like, okay, well, that was day 1, and we were starting at the beginning for people who are not serious pro coders doing JavaScript all the time. And so then we got day 102, right? And which was more advanced in day 103. And by the time we got to day 104, which is still coming yet, today is day 5, it was like, I was struggling to keep up with it. So it gets progressively more complicated. So along the way, if you have a simple question, you ask the question. If we can answer it easily, quickly, we will. If it's on topic, we'll definitely go after it. If it's something we covered last week, Leland might say, hey, go back to last week. And if he remembers which day, he'll tell you which day to watch. So this is the 10 days of free training that are coming up. They're going to go into here. However, if you want to check out the upcoming part of this is the paid training part. And so what I want to do is people are like, well, what's the paid training and why is it here? So this is essentially, there's 10 days of free training getting you up to speed and getting you kind of introduced to this stuff. And then there is a really day, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, the extra 5 days of training. That's paid training. What are we doing? I wanted to show this to you, what we're going to be working on. And so this was earlier today. I was running through this, showing people that we're in FileMaker, we're in FM starting point. And the idea is that Leland is taking this React technology, this React Native, which is a Facebook kind of platform, I would call it that. And so it's not really like people like, does it work on Mac? Does it work on Windows? We hate Mac, we hate Windows, whatever the issue is. It's Facebook. Facebook doesn't give a what you use. They don't care as long as you give them money and watch their ads. So this is Zuckerberg, right? So he's not a Mac or Windows guy. He's a money guy, right? Let's just be clear about that. He built a platform that allowed Facebook to make their application as easily as possible run on Android and iOS. And so you can use the same technology. When you're in React Native, you're coding in JavaScript. So everything we're teaching you for week 1 and week 2 is applicable here. So this is an application. This is what Leland's going to cover that extra week. You're getting a preview here. And so what it is, we're looking at this, you click this application. I'm on the iPhone. We pop it up. This is a CRM front end for the iOS, and it would also work on Android. For FM starting point, right? But it's kind of specific to this one. So notice how fast and simple and quick it is. Very, very quick, very, very nimble. And so what it's doing though, is that the data, it's getting the data on the iPhone here from the FileMaker server using the data API. right? So the data API is kind of like the XML gateway or the PHP gateway from old. It's how you use FileMaker Server as an endpoint to get data out of it. So it's really, really great. So this is running on the FileMaker Server. This, oh, I'm trying to run it like I'm on front of it. This app right here is running on my iPhone, but it could be on Android as well. And so the idea is that you code this and you have to use JavaScript. So this is definitely a pro code kind of conversation. If I bring this up, and I'm also going to ask Leland to kind of dive in here on part of the conversation if he's here. See if I can get him to.
I am here.
There he is. So we were talking about this earlier. So this is kind of like the low code world right here. And this is what we call the progressional learning. I mention this frequently. So low code here, then you get these intermediate developers, they'll do some low code stuff. They'll do some what we call pro or professional code stuff. And so the area that we're training in, we're trying to get people in here to increase their skills with JavaScript to move up to pro code. So obviously for Android, there's not really a Claris answer for Android. Claris went on the DevCon and said, yeah, we're going to build it. And then followed shortly by never to be heard from again. And so I don't expect Claris to ever support Android for whatever reason. So if you want an Android executable on the front end, you have very few choices. I could think of two choices. This is probably, now it's different. Live code is one option, and then React Native is the other option. But on iOS, you have another choice, which is just build it in FileMaker Go. So can you frame for me, Leland, why you would build a React Native application on iOS as opposed to using Go, or would you use both? Or if I could do Go and have it connect to FileMaker Server, why do I care about React Native?
Mostly the answer to that question is what is your users going to expect? And what do you want your users to use? If you're totally fine with creating a solution on FileMaker Go and having all of your users use that and use it in the way that it was meant to be made, which is you develop all of your logic, all of your screens in FileMaker Pro on the desktop. Then you open that database, host it, or you create a local file in FileMaker Go. If all of that's fine, then more power to you, because that's nice, quick, and easy, and you've got the skill set to do that. The problem is that, for instance, in my workplace, I have a large user base that needs to use it, and a good majority of my users on mobile have never used the desktop portion of FileMaker. So it kind of depends on who your client is, right? What the end result is. If in my case, I've got hundreds of users out there that want and expect to use a mobile app on Android or iOS, and that could include tablets as well. It doesn't have to just be the phone, right? So it could be an Android tablet, it can be an iPad, anything mobile. I mean, you can do that on FileMaker Go as well. But as you know, if you've used any sort of solution in a FileMaker Go app, it doesn't feel native. It does its best to try to emulate native as well as it can, but there's limitations. And those limitations are inherent, and they're there because FileMaker has made it as easy as possible for you to develop it not in a native application format or framework, but you're using FileMaker desktop app to create something that's meant to be used on mobile. So it's two different worlds. When you hold a React Native app in your hand, it's going to feel native. So for instance, if you're loading up Facebook on a mobile app, it feels very native. It's responsive. When you move between tabs, move between screens, there's no hesitation. There's no lack of animation, or there's no animation that's kind of slowed down and feels a little sluggish. None of that, because you're using a native app. If you use React Native to create an application on iOS or Android, and you have FileMaker as your data backend, you get the best of both worlds. It is more work. There's a lot more to it. So the question is the juice worth the squeeze for you?
That's a really great answer to that question. So let me ask a quick question, and this would be important for me as a person who would have to pay for this and underwrite it. If I write it once in React Native, does it cross-populate to both device platforms easily? Do I have to rewrite it separately for Android? How much work is that to jump from one to the other?
About the only difference that you would want to have in your mind while you're developing it would be your screen size. So it would be, do you ever plan on it being in a much larger device such as an iPad. So
Okay.
if you're developing for an iPad and an Android tablet and mobile cell phones for both, then you might want to develop it in such a way that your screens are using the responsive frameworks that React Native gives you to just test on both devices and make sure that it's working.
So
Besides that exception, the code base is identical across everything I just mentioned. So one code base solves all four of those. And actually, with a little bit of tweaking, you can make it work in a web browser and you can make it work on a desktop. So one code base.
Yeah, so this is once again the idea of pro code versus low code. So, and to be very clear, I'm a pretty successful FileMaker guy, but this is, I would have to spend some time learning to get to a skill level where this would be applicable for me. There's a number of you out there, and I'm thinking of Kyle specifically and a couple other folks, maybe Andy, etc., who for them, they can make a living banging away on JavaScript, but they have some experience with that. It's just about experience. If you build the experience, you have that going for you, then this is another tool in your tool belt. That's why we're providing the training. Week 1 and week 2 is to get you to the point where you can do this application is the whole idea. So this becomes maybe an option for you down the road. You code it once and it works equally well on Android phones as well as your iPhone. So that's pretty damn cool. So if you're interested in this training, that's where you're going to come down here and want to purchase this down here for the extra week. So there you go. That's what this is all about. Pretty cool. All right, upcoming broadcast schedule. The rest of this week is all JavaScript, the second week of this to the max. Margaret has a sample file for us to kick out, a new sample file for this week. Week 1 had its own sample file. Week 2 has its own sample file. She's going to be popping that out right away. And so we're going to kind of get things going here. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to give the command of the bridge to Mr. Leland Long. Okay, so be prepared. Ask the question. So he says FM backend is also interface front end with SQL question, no front end. I mean,
he's responding to, which is right above. If you know you're going to develop in JavaScript from the start, when would you choose to use an FM backend rather than another database? Okay. It seems to me the power of FM is in the ease of the front end development.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's half the answer. And I would say my full response to that question would be, yes, if you're going to be a JavaScript developer, yes, you certainly could explore other backends besides FileMaker, but that's not really the point of fmtraining.com, right? We are training FileMaker developers, so we are going with the assumption that you're going to want to use FileMaker as a backend, period, because that's your choice. That's the clients you work with. That's all of the work you've put in up until now. So can you deviate to go somewhere else? Certainly can, but that's not our intent to try to focus on.
All right, Stu, if you want to continue, here we go.
Okay, so this week, beginning today, is what I like to call JavaScript 102. It is a continuation of JavaScript 101 that we had last week, but we're going to change gears, go to a new chapter, so to speak, and start to explore some more functionality of JavaScript integration with FileMaker. And the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to begin to use a common JavaScript library that's available out there in the wild. It's called jQuery. You may or may not have ever heard of it. This is their webpage, jQuery.com. From here, you can download, you can browse the API documentation. You can learn everything you want to know from here. There's a few more sites I'll point out. Number one, let's look at W3 Schools, because they too have a lot of research or reference material and education for jQuery right along with JavaScript. So this is starting a little ways down on the page, on their page, and we're going to go through this here in a minute. Mostly, I think I'll stay right here for a moment and just kind of point out, okay, jQuery, what is it? Well, it's a way of selecting things, of handling events, producing effects, working with HTML and CSS, traversing the DOM. Ajax, we won't be covering here, but that was something it was originally a function that it could perform. And we're going to kind of take this very large jQuery library and just kind of pick it apart and pull some things into FileMaker that makes things kind of interesting. And that's what we're going to focus on for today and tomorrow. The sample file that hopefully you've found a link for and may have downloaded it already. This
Yep,
is my file. This is
we
what it looks
posted
like. Go
that.
ahead.
Yeah, we posted that file on YouTube, Twitch, and Discord, so you can download that sample file. Once again, that's a different sample file than week 1. This is the week 2 sample file.
And it's designed exactly the same way. So if you followed us along on the last several days, it'll have the same flow and a lot of the same look. So with that, we'll just jump to the very first section. And again, step 1, if you're doing this on your own, is to add a web viewer onto your layout. Call it web viewer and with a blank address. And we have several scripts to look at. And we're going to go start by looking at those. That is the set of scripts here, 6 of them. And what I've done is these same scripts are going to be used a lot later in further sections, but we're going to start combining them. So in this very first one, I've split them all out into 6 separate parts so that you can really start to understand the role that each part plays before we just combine them all into a script, and then it looks really busy and confusing. So let's start with the first one. The first one, as you know, the top section is just comments, and that gives you also some reference material, including that page that I started on. There's your link for it. They have their own GitHub. There's the link for that. There's a YouTube video that was helpful for me to put together this content. Some of it I've used, some of it I've skipped. And I'll cover this CDN here in a moment, but that gives you links at the top of your script. And pretty much the rest of the script is creating a very large single variable right here called jQuery. And what we're going to do is we're just going to concatenate jQuery 1, jQuery 2, basically these 5 above them, because it's so large I had to split it into 5 parts. But the end result is we're going to have one variable with all that garbage in it, and we're just going to exit the script passing that same variable out. And we'll use it later and you'll see that.
So there,
Go ahead.
you said it was too large. Can you be more specific as to what?
I will do that here shortly. What I will start with is, where did I get this information? Let's start there, and then I'll answer your question as far as why I had to split it into 5. So this library being out on the web and being in the wild means you can download it here or you can get it from GitHub, but there's different ways to use JavaScript libraries. And so the one that we're interested in, we're not interested in creating a separate package or a separate runtime like React Native would. We are, in order to use this within FileMaker, we need to use it the same way that a web developer would use it. And that's different. So there's a couple different ways to use libraries. And so one of the most common ways for a web designer to add a library to their web page is to use that script tag that we learned about early last week with a source of the URL to the library's content stored on the web somewhere, right? So if you were to download this, it's coming from somewhere. It's being hosted somewhere, right? I don't know if they show an example here on this web page. I'm just going to scroll through and see if they provide it like what I'm talking about, but I don't think that they are. So nope.
Network or no?
Yes, that does stand for Content Delivery Network. And so I want to look at that next. If you go to cdn.com, or excuse me, cdnjs.com, specifically for JavaScript, if we go back here to home, this is the landing page that you'll get. And this is one of several CDNs available out on the web. Google has their own. I think a lot of big providers have their own hosting service for it. But CDN is another common one. And what you can do is, this doesn't have every library that's ever been invented for JavaScript. But if I did a search here for jQuery, there it pops up. And I'll skip all of the different variations on a theme, but here's the main primary jQuery. If I click on that, here's several links. And if I narrow this down to just JavaScript, I've got 4 links to pick from. And you'll notice that they're just URLs. And they end with a .js file, which means that if I just link to this URL here on the web, I will have instant access to that library in all of its glory without downloading it, without figuring out where to store it. It's just always available out here on the web through this delivery network. So what I did is, there's a slim version and there's a minimized version, but here's kind of the full everything you can expect for the current version 3.6.3. And if you just copy this URL, or even just I'm gonna copy the URL and just open it. Look what you get. You just get text. This is the contents. If you look at your URL, this is the contents of a JavaScript file posted out there on the internet.
So for more beginning people who are on my the continuum of learning, or the progression of learning, when you say a library, and I know it's a JavaScript library, it could be another library of something else, right? For basic terminology, what does a library mean?
A library means somebody created a finished product to use in many other products. So let's see, what would be a good example? There would be a library out there for PDF editing. There might be a library out there to connect to FedEx. You provide a tracking number and it gives you back results. A library is kind of like an extension, or in FileMaker terms, it would be like a custom function.
A bunch
or
of custom functions, right? Yeah. So imagine if in FileMaker you actually had a link like this and it said briandunning.content delivery, blah, blah, blah. And you put that into FileMaker. FileMaker would go out on the internet when it opens up and downloads all the available custom functions and loads them into FileMaker Pro for you automatically. That's what a library is. And what happens is back in the day, 20 years ago, they would build libraries, people would access the library, and then everyone would start linking to the library, because for your code to use it, generally it doesn't necessarily cache the library locally. Every time it opens, it might open it up and check it. It might re-download it. So you had all these people downloading the libraries, overloading the downloads. So that led us to the Content Delivery Network. Content Delivery Network is nothing more than a bunch of file servers. I'm just going to use the word file server loosely for everyone, distributed everywhere around the internet, and local regions where you don't think there's a data center. It's a hidden data center that Amazon sets up, that Apple sets up, and they put these content delivery network servers in there that deliver. Like when you download a YouTube video, you're not downloading a copy of the directly from the original server. You're downloading it from what they call an edge location. An edge location is the closest server, maybe 5 or 10 miles away, which has a copy of that video for you. So you don't have to go all the way to New York or all the way to London or all the way around the planet to get the video. You only have to download it from the closest location. So that's what Content Delivery Network is. So I know if you're an advanced developer, I'm killing you with this, but it's important to understand kind of conceptually that someone created a library, you reference the library will be, once they post it, will kind of filter its way across the internet to all these content delivery network servers, like 500 servers or 1,000 servers around the globe, right? And so that means there'll be maybe 1,000 copies of jQuery 363 distributed around the globe. And you will ask for it, it will find the closest one for you up here at the top. So that's kind of an important concept. So sorry about that.
Yeah,
it's basic.
That's all right. I like the idea of explaining in a one-line summary what a library would be synonymous to in the FileMaker world. And I would say it would be like a custom function.
Yep.
You're trying to solve a problem. You go out on the interwebs and you do a search and you look for a custom function that does what you're interested in. And if you find it, you can copy and paste it into FileMaker and use it yourself. You didn't have to rewrite it from scratch. That's what a library is in JavaScript. So if you look at this library that's sitting out here on the internet, in this case through a CDN link, you have the name of the library in the current version at the top, a link to their primary web page so that you can go learn about it. You can tell here that they've included another JavaScript library. So they needed one, they added it. They probably got permission to do that. And under that, you have the copyright notice as far as whether or not you can share it, what you can do with it, the date that it was posted here, and then it starts into the actual code. And of course, you would probably want to go to this web page to learn how to use it, how to implement it. Let's get back to Richard's question. How come I split this thing up into 5 parts? Well, if I go here to this window and I do a select all copy, go into FileMaker, create a new insert text right here, and I try to paste this thing in, what do you suppose is going to happen?
I'm guessing it's too big to fit.
I go to paste, and yeah, I'm greater than 30,000 characters. So that is why I split it into 5 parts right here, because here's the entire thing split into 5 parts. Now, what does that do for us? Number one, you'll notice the current version is 3.6.3. I've actually copied and pasted in here 3.6.1. So there's been a couple minor revisions since I've put this in here in December.
Okay, so stop.
Right.
David was just asking this question. He says, well, could you copy the library locally to your own solution/server? You could. And that would guarantee that if you had it working with 3.6.1, that someone makes a code change to 3.6.3 or 3.6.4, you would know that 3.6.1 works. If someone accidentally had a newer version and broke it, you could avoid that, but then you might be on an older one that doesn't have security fixes, right? So it's always Leland, it's always a balance, right?
And what you see right here is kind of what he said, which is instead of downloading it and having it hosted on my own server, I've downloaded it and actually added it into my script right here in this file. So this won't change. They can make 27 new variations of jQuery. They might even change some major functionality like Richard just pointed out, and nothing here in my code is going to break because I built it based here on this version. So, and not only that, then if my internet goes down, this file still works for me, right? Because I have it locally.
I'm clapping for you because the internet does go down. Thank you very much. Yes.
So when I have all 5 of these in here separately, here's my one line that combines them all. I just concatenate them all and end up with one variable. So that's one way to do it. And then I exit this script passing out that entire content because I have another script that's going to call this and that's going to use that as a script result. Okay. So this right here is the raw library all tossed into 5 separate lines and can be returned anytime I want it.
I'm looking at the on Discord, the animated GIF from David with the lady from a movie ripping off books. That's literally what this is. You run a command and it rips off. How many functions are in jQuery? Probably thousands of functions in there. It's probably
I don't know, quite a bit.
Yeah. So it's not just one. It's like a huge inventory of tools that you can use. Pretty great.
Mm-hmm. And again, you have W3 Schools that goes through all the different things you can do it. Plus, you can go straight to jQuery's API documentation right here and start browsing. And there's a lot of stuff to cover. And a lot of it we're going to ignore today. Now, they also show a change history from version 1.0 until today as far as what's changed, right? So you can pay attention to that if you want, or you can ignore it and grab your own specific version.
Yep.
Myriad of ways to do it. All right. So here's the entire library that we're going to use later on. Our next script is a single insert text, which we pass back out again. And this is my custom JavaScript for this particular section. We go in and take a look at this. I will say that if you were with us last week when we were talking about functions and anonymous functions, I kind of alluded to the arrow function, which was an ES6 item that was new. And sure enough, at least in my version of FileMaker, arrow functions are working. So like I said, if you wonder whether some new functionality in JavaScript or something works, or what in the HTML boilerplate code is required and what isn't, just change a line or two, go back and see if it works. And if it does, well, there's your answer. In this case, this arrow function works. So we are creating a function here called jQuery_hide_element. And you notice with this arrow function, we don't actually even have to use the word function, but we do have equal parenthesis for our parameter, which in this case is empty. There's our arrow, hence the name arrow function, and our standard code block inside curly brackets, which we learned about last week. With that, I've got 2 lines of comment. So this one function does one thing, and it looks really cryptic, doesn't it? This is what jQuery looks like. Now, if you recall last week, several times we used a built-in browser function common in HTML called document.getElementById. We used it several times. This does the same thing, but they replace document.getElementById with just a $sign. So that's what the $sign means. It means replace all of that with that. It's doing the same thing. It means select something that's inside in the parameter, which I called h1. And we're going to call a method on that called hide. So let's jump over to documentation for a minute because they actually show it fairly nicely. Let's go to W3 Schools right here. Let's go to selectors. And you can see there's a lot of different ways to select things in the DOM, in the document object model, which is basically all of the stuff on your web page. These are all kinds of different ways of using jQuery to select things besides just by name. So what I'm doing is the simplest, most straightforward form, which is just searching by name. And you'll notice that I also, in that JavaScript, once we do have our element, our H1 element, what are we going to do with it? We're going to call a method called hide with no parameter. So let's go look at that in the documentation. I think that is under effects, and there it is right there. So these, once you have an element selected in jQuery, this is a list of things you can do to it. And we're just going to use this hide method or function, which hides whatever element we ended up with. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We want to start simple so that we kind of wrap our head around this complicated new stuff. So this is going to grab an element called H1 and it's going to hide it. That's all this function is going to do. And as you know from last week, because this is not an anonymous function, it has a name, that means it's not going to run until we actually call it somehow, which in this case, we're going to call it from FileMaker just like we did last week.
There is a question I have.
Simple and straightforward.
I'm going to throw this in.
Go ahead.
From MV Puker, what is the web viewer limitation for characters? I guess the maximum number of characters, maybe?
Man, I mean, it would be I don't know if that would differ than a web page out on the web. I would say several megabytes, if not even higher. I mean, today's web browsers are a lot quicker and faster and can do a heck of a lot more than they did back in the year 2000. Back then, I would say that you would probably run into some limitations. Nowadays, that might be a challenge. I mean, you've got all kinds of JavaScript, images, advertising links that are coming in. Today's web pages are very busy and even CPU intensive. So what the limit is probably beyond what you would ever attempt to use.
Okay, cool.
All right, moving on. We have our JavaScript library exiting this script. We have our custom JavaScript exiting this script. Next up, should sound familiar. We did it last week, and it's called an HTML template. And this is where I have just kind of a bare bones template that we're going to use on our web page. Now, this one looks busier only because I've got a lot more things here in the body. Last week, I kept it to just one item in the body, right? So this time, we're going to add a lot more to our body. But the header up here from the title up should look familiar to you from last week. It's pretty much the same boilerplate code. And this time, we have two scripts that we're inserting into two different places. And on day one, Richard had a question of, well, does it have to be somewhere specific? And we learned on day two that no, we don't. They can be used multiple times and they can be in different areas. In this case, we have one up in the header and we have one in the body. I've just done that just for organizational purposes. There's no rhyme or reason. Mostly, I'm loading jQuery, the entire library, up inside my header because that's just kind of a point of reference. I'm not do anything specific inside of it. I just need it available to me. So I just toss it into the header.
But you do it
once I'm inside.
You do it first before the rest of it though, right? Obviously.
I do, because especially if I had an anonymous function that would run as soon as it loads, I would need access to something that already exists. So I need jQuery to already exist, right?
Yep. So yeah.
Now in this example, I don't have an anonymous function, so I probably could reverse the order and things wouldn't break. Right. Okay. In this particular case. So now you'll notice I'm using that same placeholder trick that I used last week, which is just custom, which is three stars and capitalized jQuery. I'm doing that 3 times. I'm doing it here for JavaScript. I'm doing it here for jQuery, and I'm doing it here for something you haven't seen yet, which is my CSS. So these 3 are going to be used with the FileMaker substitution function in order to actually populate content in there before we dump it into our web viewer. So that's just for organizational purposes. So this keeps this smaller, cleaner, easier to read. We have a single header. Now this header is different than our metadata in the header of the web page. This header is kind of synonymous with the title header you can have in FileMaker on a layout. And it's mostly just the header at the top of the page that the user will actually see. This header is typically not seen. Typically, it's metadata, stuff behind the hood, behind the curtain. I have one div here with an ID of container. I have a heading here with an ID of heading 1. I have an H1 here with a class of heading 2. These are all might be new terms to you, but you'll see them here in a minute. I have a paragraph with a class name of para2. You can see that right here in the beginning of those tags, IDs and class names and whatnot. So this is a little bit more complicated than what we saw last week, but now that you've seen the code, let's actually put it all together so that it makes sense, because you'll actually see something. But we have two more steps to do. First, we're going to introduce some CSS, and here's what it looks like. So we're going to change the attributes of a container, of the header, and of the body. And we're doing things like colorization, font families, font sizes, lines, and so forth.
Container here is not a FileMaker container. It's a
correct. This is a container in the web page.
Okay.
And you'll see what that looks like here in a minute. Now, this script right here is where we take all the previous scripts, call them, and grab the results. So here's where I'm calling that jQuery library, the first one we looked at, and here's where I'm pulling the result from it and capturing it into my local variable here called jQuery. Then I'm doing the same thing for our custom JavaScript, pulling its result into our custom variable called our JavaScript. Here I'm pulling the HTML template, and here I'm pulling our CSS. So we have 4 different variables now with all those pieces and parts. And here's where we do the substitution to replace those funky placeholders with our actual code from our variables. So this final HTML is going to be all of that, all put together and ready to be tossed into our web viewer, which we've called web viewer on the layout. And then we just exit, okay? So when I do that, we get HTML rendered on our screen. And you can kind of imagine this is that header. This is the H1, this is the H1, these are the 2 paragraphs, okay? And you'll notice that I've applied some CSS to them. They have some colorization, they have some much larger, we've got our header text in white. They're much bigger than if I had not done any CSS at all, right? And I've just got some boilerplate Latin phrase in there just for filler text.
Container?
So
Container?
the container, I believe, is this object here that holds, that's going to have a background color of black.
Okay.
That has the text centered. That's the container right here.
I was thinking a container would be like a cell, maybe in a table, but that's kind of what you've got going there, a giant cell.
A myriad of things it can be. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Lots of pure HTML and CSS at this point is what you're staring at. But if we use the web inspector, as you learned how to do last week, if we actually go look what's in this page, there's tons of information in this page because we added the entire jQuery library, lots of code, and somewhere down here, we started adding our own stuff, which is way down here at the bottom. There it is. Here's our H1 learning jQuery inside of a container. Yeah, I mean, way down here at the bottom, here's our custom script, our custom function that hasn't done anything yet, but it's sitting there waiting to be called. And there it is. So from line 4032 is the beginning of our body. Now do you see why I split it up the way that I did? Because when you're looking at just the template, you don't see 4,000 lines of code. You just see this. This is much easier to digest with your eyes than 4,000 lines of code, trying to figure out where the CSS begins, where it ends, where the jQuery ends and it begins, where my JavaScript ends and it begins, right? So this is just a nice way of keeping things clean and eventually putting it all together before I dump it into the web viewer. But this final HTML is over 4,000 lines of garbage. Not garbage, but you know, stuff.
Yeah, who wants
so this was a very busy script, but we tried to make it nice and simple for us beginners in JavaScript 102 to wrap our heads around to figure out how did you get 4,000 lines in there and what all does it do? We just explained all that.
Yeah, David Angel says his head just kind of exploded and blew up or something. Yes. Lynn from us says, why did you use an H? It's in Discord, bottom question. Why'd you use an H1 ID and an H1 class? How are they different, question mark?
And that's a good question. But if you take a look in here, we've got selectors and events and whatnot. We're going to be using different things in different sections, including our selectors, that is the next step to where we kind of itemize, okay, here's where I'll use class, here's where I'll use ID, so on and so forth. So yes, you caught that there is a difference, but I'm not quite prepared to explain it yet. But good catch.
So later today, though? Yes, maybe? Or tomorrow?
Yes, that's the next section. We should get to that today. Yep.
Okay, cool.
What you just saw and everything we just went through was just the init button. So click the init button, we get this. So what's our run button do? Well, that is our custom JavaScript, which was one line, right? So let's go back and look at it. That's this line here. And what that says is, hey, look in all of that HTML on the page, and every occurrence of an ID with a name of H1, hide it. No matter how many there are, every element out there called with a name of H1, hide it. So let's do that. I go back to my screen and I hit run. Boom. 3 things just disappeared. Now you notice the screen has not been refreshed. If I hit init and I hit a run and I keep bouncing back and forth, init repopulates the web page. That's kind of like a refresh. But run doesn't refresh anything. All it does is say, hey, with everything that's already on the page, using jQuery, look and select every H1 element, or every element named H1, however you want to phrase that. And if you find it, hide it. And you notice everything else redraws around it. It all compacts. So that's just one of those kind of cool things you get on the web for free when you have a div or a paragraph or a container or something that has an ID. You can use jQuery to quickly find it and hide it. And you can hit also, there's a function called show, right? So I could have a second button here that would show it. And we'll play with that a little later. But mostly I just wanted you to see a quick example with one line of code, taking some existing HTML on a page, is to just use one line of JavaScript to say, hey, I know I built this web page, so I know that there's 3 H1s on the page. So I want you to go in, find those and just hide them. Boom, it's done. So that's power of JavaScript. And that's a little glimpse into the beginning glimpse of the power of jQuery. So as long as you can kind of wrap your head around that, we'll move on. So we kind of introduced you to selectors, but now we're going to do a lot more of them. Okay. So before we run through code, let's just try the buttons. I'm going to hit init. We get the same thing we had before. Okay. We run this script and it looks like we get the same thing that we had before.
Yep.
But we'll confirm that. I think we're probably hiding the same thing.
Yep.
But if we use this one, we only hide just heading 1 instead of all 3. I'm just hiding 1 there, right? This I'm going to hide by class. And evidently we only had 1 item on the screen with a class on it, and that was heading 2.
Okay.
And this one I'm going to hide multiple elements, or actually, no, I'm going to colorize multiple elements. And we'll look at the code to see exactly why it picked and chose what it did. But I hit this button and certain things in both paragraphs change color. Okay. So this is another thing that you can do with jQuery, is to pick and choose certain elements on the screen and do something to them with a method. Okay. So that's what we're accomplishing. Now let's go look under the hood to see all the little particulars of what it is we did. That is this section 2, 1.02. That's these scripts here. This particular section here on selectors. Now, this time I'm combining, this time this one script combined everything previously and put them all together. Now I'm doing it with just this one script. I've got all the library here. I've got all my JavaScript here. I have my template here, CSS here, combine them all here, pop them into a web viewer here. So instead of having 5 scripts, this is one that does exactly the same thing. But hopefully in splitting it out and walking through it slowly, that made a lot more sense than starting here, right? Because this is a lot. This is a lot going on. I mean, this ends up with 4,000 lines of code. So better to start off to explain it and split it out a little bit further. Richard, it sounds like you had something to say.
Yeah, I'm watching a conversation. It's a good question. Kyle and Andy are helping answer questions on the Discord side, but I'm going to repeat the question. Not Stu's, but Schmiegel had a question. Does jQuery add a lot of demand to it being so big? So here's the deal. If you had a solution where at the beginning of the solution you said, hey, go get this off the closest content delivery network fresh every time, then yeah, there'd be this lag of you loading this stuff across the internet, right? In his solution, he pre-loaded it into some scripts. That's how that insert text commands where you concatenate them together. So it's probably about as fast as you could do it because it's already inside of FileMaker in our situation, right? But if you were downloading it off the internet fresh every time, yeah, there'd be more of a noticeable lag probably, right? So, but having it localized inside the scripts already makes it, pretty instantaneous. So that's those.
Now, with that, let me add on to what you just said, Richard,
Yep.
because yes, the jQuery library was large, but let me ask you a question. With one of your videos on YouTube, let's say the day one video that's an hour long, what's the file size? Approximately
4 to 5 gigs.
4 to 5 gigs. Now, for those of you that have been using computers a while, I remember my first 20 meg hard drive.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know how I was going to fill it up. I put everything that I owned on the thing and it was still less than 25% full from floppy disks.
Yep.
So a 20 meg file back then was astronomically huge. I remember my first download of a color picture on AOL took 45 minutes and it was 200K, right? It's all relative. So today you go to web pages all day long and it has all kinds of animations, streaming media, advertisements loaded all over the page. If you save that one web page and all of its content to your hard drive, it's probably pretty large, but you do it day in and day out and your browser does not seem slow, right? So what I just did for curiosity's sake is I just went to this entire jQuery library, saved it to a text file. What do you suppose it is?
250K, 300K, something small. Oh,
right here on my screen, 300K.
That's trivially tiny.
That's so insignificant, it's not even worth a blink, right? That's the entire jQuery library. But when you look at it in your web inspector, that's like 4,000 lines of code and it looks astronomically huge. It's all
like
relevant.
Encyclopedia Britannica, really for those of you who know what that is. How old are you? And do you know what the Encyclopedia Britannica is? If you are, you're old as hell.
Even though I've loaded all of that and all of my other code and I end with 4,000 lines of code, how fast does FileMaker render it? I mean, it's not even a blink of an eye. When I click on it, it's there. And there's everything in there, including the entire jQuery library. So it's all relative. And it's a drop in a bucket. So there's things you can do in a FileMaker database that can have 1 million records to where it's a pretty small file. But then there's another thing you can do to a file of 1 million records that makes it 10 times larger, right? So that is your experience in drawing on things like, do I make it an unstored calc or not? That determines a lot. Do I make the file indexed or not? Lots of decisions can change whether or not your solution is efficient and performant versus bring the thing to its knees because you made kind of a bad design decision. So same thing in JavaScript, I'm sure. So I think that fully covers that question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but it's a good question. Excellent question. Thank you.
It was, yes. So let's run to the scripts on this bad boy. So first off, here's the entirety of everything that gets dumped into the web page down here on line 48. And let's look at our custom JavaScript because that's really the only thing that changed, right? Our HTML template's identical. It still has CSS, jQuery, and JavaScript going into it. So all of this script is identical to the last one except for our custom JavaScript. So that's just what we're going to focus on. Here's what it looks like. Excuse me, it looks kind of busy. We have 4 functions. At the top is nothing but comments. So all I've done is I've created JavaScript with 4 functions. And you notice I had 4 buttons, and each one of those buttons tells FileMaker to run a specific function by name. So that's really what's going on. Each one of these functions is tied to a button. Here's the name of the first one. Here's the name of the second one, third and fourth. And for instance, in this one, it only does one thing. Same thing we did last time. It hides everything named H1. And down here, 1 line of code. Everything else is comments. This one, let's look at it a little closer. This has a hashtag or a pound sign in front of it, as the kids say. The kids would say what? Hashtag?
Yep.
You tell kids nowadays a pound sign, they look at you like, what? You're talking a foreign language. Hashtag for them, right? So the jQuery hashtag ID selector uses the ID attribute of the HTML tag to find the specific element, where without the hashtag, you're looking on elements based on name. So this has to be specifically an ID. Down here, you use a dot selector for a class name. to find a specific class. So this is a dot heading 2, so that looks for a class equals heading 2, where a pound sign, pound heading 1, looks specifically for an ID with the name heading 1. So what you're starting to do is you're introducing some wildcard or some descriptor symbols, right, that narrow down exactly what it is you're looking for, from very loose searches up here to very specific searches down here. So this is looking for ID heading 1, this is looking for class heading 2, and this one is looking for multiple elements with like an AND query, which is separated by spaces. So this finds everything that's a paragraph and everything that's a span. Go ahead.
So the pound sign up here is a reserved item, and that period is so that's ID, right? And this was what, class, like that?
Yes. So if we look at that in documentation to see how they're explaining it versus me, we'll skip jQuery, we'll go to W3 Schools. For selectors, remember this page with all kinds of options for how you can select things? So if we go to the top, here's the hashtag or pound sign, and that's looking for an ID. Here's the class with a dot intro, all elements with the class intro. This is finding multiple classes. This is finding a single P element. So again, you start getting more and more descriptive as far as what it is you're trying to find on a page that might have tons of material. And if you're designing the web page, it makes it a lot easier because you know what you're naming everything. But if you're using somebody else's web page, it can look really busy, and jQuery can start to save you a heck of a lot of time and effort by doing some really broad searches to find everything on the page that matches .intro, for instance. And if you find what you need, great. If not, you kind of just get more and more and more specific. For instance, this is a search for the very first paragraph in the entire page, and only the first. This one looks for just the last paragraph in the entire web page, just the last one. So this will only return 1, right? This one's interesting. This will find you the even numbered TR elements. So if you've got 1,000 on the page, this will return 500 of them if they're all even. This one will return all the odds.
Those are weird.
Yeah, you start to have all kinds of really weird selections that you can pick from.
Yeah.
If you have parent-child relationships out here, you can find the first child, first of a type, last child. I mean, it starts getting really complicated. And this just that's why this is reference material, right? If you're trying to find something specific, this is where you start playing around, because you can start to really find things of what you're looking for as you're exploring through the web page and trying to determine what they're calling things. So that's just kind of a quick example of some jQuery selectors. And if we go back and take a look at all of this in action again, just to refresh your mind, we hit an it, that populates everything. This one is going to hide by element, that hides 3 different elements. We'll bring them back here. This one hides just a single ID.
Yep.
There, it disappeared. Bring it all back. This one hides a specific class, which I just had 1 item there with a class name, header 2, heading 2. And last but not least, it found 2 pieces of paragraphs and colorized them to red. Let's look at specifically at that one, because that one was a little different than all the rest of them, right? If we look at our custom JavaScript, that was this one down here. What did I do? I did a multiple search for inside paragraph and a span. So everything that was inside a paragraph and a span got colorized to red. Now, if we look at our HTML, what were those? Well, you can see it. It's right here. There's the span inside a paragraph. So both of those things had to be true in order for the selector to say, okay, found one. It had to be a combination of a span within a paragraph. So I was narrowing it down, right? It's
That was
like
an AND search, right? An AND, an AND search, yeah. So both.
Yes, exactly. And you did that by putting in multiple things inside quotes separated by spaces. So we did a P space span, and that found all spans that were also part of a paragraph. So I kind of think we beat that one with over the head quite a few times. So I didn't cover these other scripts, but all they were individual. They were tied to a run button, right? So each run button had something specific it did. This was the first run, and what it does is it runs JavaScript in a web viewer. So there's our web viewer. Here's the function name that it ran, jQuery hide element. Remember, I had 4 on a page. This was the first one, and the rest of it was just error checking. So that was the first button. This is the second button, a different function name. This was the third button, different function name. And this was the last button, different function name. So that's how I had all of those 4 functions sitting on the web page, and I had 4 separate buttons tied to running each one of those 4 separate functions individually, rather than like all at once or something. Hopefully that answered the question from the last section when somebody was asking, how come you did class and not ID? I think that kind of answered it.
Yeah, they're handled a little differently. I think this is an area you have to play with this for a while before you develop a comfort level. My comfort level is more than it used to be, but it's still not like good.
So the next one for me became something that was rather fun. So the next 2 I think are kind of cool. This one I don't have any buttons over here. I've got them here on a web page instead. So let's look at the code first. And that's just the single code here, single script. And you'll notice it's doing the same thing we've done before. It's just taking everything and dumping it into the web viewer. So everything is the same here except for our JavaScript and probably our HTML code, right? Because on HTML now we've got some buttons on the page with IDs. Okay. We do have 1 paragraph with some basic code in there. We still have an H1 heading 1 here. We've got our header up here. So some of things are the same, but now we've got some additional buttons. And if we take a look at our JavaScript, we have a little bit of complication going here with the JavaScript. So I think I'll explain that after we look at what it does. So for instance, for events, if here's a button on a page, if I click it, that's a FileMaker custom dialog. Button was pressed. Okay. So you can probably guess kind of, if you were here throughout all of these classes, you can probably imagine in your mind what's going on as far as clicking a button on a web page and having FileMaker respond to it with its own custom dialog, right? But we'll look at it, but you can probably figure out what's going on. Now, the click hide paragraph, that probably makes sense now, right? If I click this, you're probably going to imagine that paragraph's going to disappear. And boom, it did. And this shows it. So this button hides it, this button shows it. So again, now I've got mouse events clicking inside of a button that are triggering JavaScript to do something, and the something that it's doing is either manipulating the DOM or in this case, talking to FileMaker. To have it show me a custom dialog. Now, this one's rather tricky. Mouse enter. This is hard to trigger. I'm going to try it. Oh, it did. That hit all kinds of things. And when I move my mouse back, it happens so fast. You see the screen flickering.
Oh, it's a on hover or on a hover.
Yeah, it's the hover mouse enter event. So it's so darn fast that it's kind of like electronics. Anybody who's built a switch in electronics knows that you have to use a routine called a debouncing routine because pressing a button.
Yes.
Yes, because you push a button and it actually triggers multiple times. So you have to create kind of a locking mechanism to just try to get one button press out of it. Same thing's going on here. It's happening so darn fast that you see just lots of screen flickering. So this last one is kind of interesting. Mouse events in jQuery is actually going to return to JavaScript an object with a lot of information in it. Well, that's all well and good, but what if you want to look at that? Well, a couple of different ways to do that. First off, if we look at our web inspector and bring it off to the side, let's bring up the console and let's just have it sit right here. Well, I'm better, and then I'll make this window a little smaller. So when I click this capture event, I dump it here to the console. Remember how I said I like to use the console for debugging?
Yeah.
What I did is I dumped that event data to the console so I could look at it. And and here I threw it into the custom dialog as well in FileMaker. So this is all the information that comes to JavaScript from the browser when I click this button. It actually passes back an event with a lot of information. I wanted to see it all. So there it is there, and here it is down here. So I'll make this go away. And if we come down here and expand this item, you can see I get back all kinds of stuff. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. But here's the target, which was the actual button and its ID button 5. And this is all the stuff that came back with it from that event. Just from clicking on it, this is all the information that JavaScript gives you. Actually, the browser provided it. The browser provides it to JavaScript. You can do with it what you want. right? It's overkill. It's kind of like doing a data API on a huge file with hundreds of records on it, but you only need one field, right? And you didn't go out and make a layout that just had that one field. You had a layout that had them all. So you got back a lot more than you ever needed. That's kind of like what's going on here. You're getting back all of the event information. And from that, you can do with it whatever you want. You can parse some of it out. And that's what I did.
That was a good analogy. That's two good analogies in 15 minutes. That's pretty good. All right.
I'm on a roll. Okay. So with that, we probably better look at some scripts, see what the heck's going on here. So here's our custom JavaScript, which is pretty lengthy. So we're going to go through it. Let's start at the comments at the top. jQuery is tailor-made to respond to events on an HTML page. So different actions are what is being called events. So things like moving a mouse over an element, selecting a radio button, clicking on an element, those are all events, right? So every time you do one of those, if JavaScript says, hey, give me the event, you just saw what all you get. You get a ton of information, and then it's up to you what you do with it. So here's an example in jQuery, a one-line example of how to assign a click event to every single paragraph on a page. What you can do is attach a click event to every occurrence of P, which is a paragraph on the page. So if you've got a page with 350 paragraphs, this one line will assign a click event to all 350 of those. Whoa. So I think that kind of probably is one of the best ways of describing why jQuery can be your friend and how it can be a very powerful tool in your tool belt. Because who wants to write 350 separate click events for every paragraph on the page, hard-coded on a web page, right? Be easier just to do this one line of code.
Yeah, okay.
So once you've defined this click event, then the next part you have to do, the next step, is to define what should happen when that event fires. And the way you describe that is you pass it a function. So remember on JavaScript day number 2,
okay,
we said that JavaScript functions are a first-class citizen and that you can actually pass functions as a parameter. This is an example because you have to pass a parameter to the click method to tell it what you want to do when that paragraph is clicked. You don't define it later. You have to define it now. And then every time it's clicked, your function runs, whatever you told it to do. So the first thing I will describe here is this one line of code because it looks kind of confusing. But if you think through it, it actually kind of makes sense. It's actually kind of readable and understandable just because it's kind of self-explaining. We have the $sign parentheses, and what does that tell you? That means it's a jQuery selector. But we're not putting it in quotes. So we're not saying look for an ID called document, right? We're not putting a period in front of it. So we're not saying look for a class called document. We're not putting a hashtag in. We're just saying $sign parenthesis document. That means this selects the entire document on the web page. And this is how you do that with jQuery, is you do it that way. Now, over on our previous 5 days, we would say document.get something, right? That's how you access the document there. But in jQuery, this is how you access the entire document. And this is a method called .ready on that document. What does that mean? Well, this fires as soon as the web page is done loading. It is now ready for your use. So
and
as the entire
we could use that in FileMaker scripting. When the layout's done rendering and it's ready, then do the as a trigger.
Yeah. Now you can use this in FileMaker to do that.
Oh, really?
So now you have it.
Ooh.
You now have that in FileMaker by doing it here and here. Whatever you pass in inside the parentheses is what it would do. And all you could do in there was just call yourself a FileMaker script. And that'll be fired every time the document is fully ready. So you'd have like 3 lines of code there and you'd get your wish. Kind of cool, right? So I'm going to highlight here everything inside that document ready as far as what we are passing in as our function. There it is. So it's just taking in a function and there it is. It's in several parts and we'll go through it. But there's what that document.ready is getting. I'm telling it to do all of this when it's ready. Okay. Now that's an anonymous function, right? Because there's no name. So that just means as soon as this thing is ready, run this function immediately, as soon as it's ready.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to do. And I've split it into sections. Here's the first section.
Okay.
And you'll see what it is it's a jQuery selector for an ID. See the pound sign? So we know it's an ID search for a button 1. So this is going to find every occurrence of ID button 1 on the web page. and it's going to attach a click function to it, just like we described up here. What's the function do? Right here. 2 comments and a trigger to FileMaker. The comment just simply says action goes here. Now this line right here would, if you were to enable it, would make a JavaScript alert pop up that would say button was pressed.
Okay.
And I disabled that and turned this one on instead, which is to run a FileMaker script. We're using with option here, option number 5. We're going to call the script FMP console, and here's the parameter we're going to pass in. Sound familiar? We kind of used that console once last week.
Yep.
We go back down here and look at that. That's way down here at the bottom. That's our homemade FileMaker console log, right? Where we take in a parameter, we show it in a custom dialog, and then we also create a global variable that is will just create a list of all of our incoming console triggers and give it a timestamp, right? So that we can, if we go back and see if we've hit it a few times, here's our console, and we've had 3 entries. So all of this is pretty simple and straightforward, but at first glance, it looks really complicated. But based upon everything you learned last week, you should actually feel a lot more comfortable looking at this stuff, even though today you're learning a lot more advanced stuff, right? As far as just the plain JavaScript goes, this suddenly looks a lot less daunting than it did a week ago, I would presume.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's not as crazy. It's just learning like the inside handshake, like the dollar document. You're looking for at the entire document, not the ID, and not. Well, I guess the other. What was it? ID and what class, or what was the other thing you were?
Class. Yeah, all of these different selectors, right? You have lots to pick from, and so yeah, we just used this selected the entire document, did something with it. This one here selected hashtag button 1, so that's every occurrence of an ID on the web page called button 1, right?
Yeah.
And we're doing the same thing here for button 2, same thing here for button 3, same thing here for button 4, and same thing here for button 5. So breaking this down into sections, it's just kind of repeating itself. It's just doing it on different buttons on the web page, right? Button 1 through 5. And this one function makes all of this magic happen, because what it's doing is when this is all loading, all of those buttons are getting these click functions attached to them. And then they just sit idle until the event triggers. When the event triggers, these functions run.
Oh, yeah. And hover function. As a reminder, for those of you, it's not obvious until you get into it, but there is no hover function when you're on a mobile device with your finger hovering over the top. At least the tech isn't quite there yet, where it can determine that your finger's hovering, but you haven't touched it yet.
So for button 1, we're attaching a click event, and we're passing in the function anonymous, meaning run immediately without being called. It's going to run this FileMaker script called FMP console, passing this parameter in. And it's going to run that every single time button 1 is clicked. So that's what this does right here. This one, button number 2, it's doing all the same thing. It's creating a click method. It's attaching a click event handler. Here's the function we're passing in, and it does one thing, which is find ID para 1 and make it hide. And that's all that button does. Every single time it's clicked, that runs. The button next to it is almost the same. It's tied to the same selector, ID para 1, but this one actually shows it instead of hide it. So those act like a toggle. Now this one here, that hover function is a toggle. So that's why it flickered like crazy when you hovered over it, is because it was constantly showing, hiding, showing, hiding, showing, hiding, 100 times per microsecond or something. I don't know. It was pretty fast. So this last one is the most complicated, button number 5. What is it we're doing here? Well, this right here is defining one variable called results. And the variable is being created as an object. See the curly brackets? So this is manually creating an object, a custom object in JavaScript with 3 key value pairs. Here's the first key. Here's the second key. There's the third key. And here's what we're passing in. The event current target ID into this first one. This one is passing in the event, which is E, current target dot inner HTML. And then this third one is the outer HTML. So it's passing all 3 of those information. It's creating an object in a variable called results, and we're passing that as a parameter to FileMaker, to the console log.
So the object is called results. It's not in quotes or anything else. It's just, yeah, it's all the little subtleties of the syntax is what gets me. So yeah.
Yes. So now this creates the JavaScript object. You cannot pass an object to FileMaker. So we have to use a conversion here. We have to give it a JSON function called stringify, and we pass in that object, and JSON will stringify that so that we can pass it to FileMaker as a string.
Okay.
Now, if you remember, let's go back and run that one button. That was this last one. That passed it to FileMaker. There it is right there. See, there's the ID key. There's the value. There's the inner key. There's the value. There's the outer key, and there's the value. So there's our custom object coming into FileMaker as a string. And you can use JSON's parsing functions within FileMaker to pull out all three of those values into separate variables if you wish, right? Then we also dumped it to the console down here.
Kyle Williams is one of our JavaScript. This is the you do all the time, Kyle. You dream about this at night? I mean, this is really powerful, but he's one of these guys. He helped actually present on here quite a few times, and then he got a new job where they keep him busy. He doesn't have time to present anymore, but he's really quite good at this. But this is pretty deep, pretty deep.
So I think I'll cover one next section, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, we're starting to run.
This next one is this next section is a subset of events. So it's the same thing, but it's focusing just on mouse and keyboard. And when I came across this on the interwebs, I immediately thought, oh, I need to redo Space Invaders, and I need to use JavaScript just for the keyboard inputs. So I did that, and then after that was done, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this in Pac-Man now. So now on this one, I made the script run just from loading on the page. So right now it's actually live. And when I move my mouse over here, down here at the bottom, you'll notice nothing's changing. But as soon as I move my mouse inside the web viewer, we get instant X and Y coordinates of that mouse. So, and you'll see it's lickety split fast. And I haven't clicked anything. I just moved my mouse inside of it. Now I'm outside of it. Now I'm back in. Now let me just press a key. Oops. My web viewer is not active. Let me click on the web viewer. Now press a key. There we go. So I get a key code 65, and in FileMaker, I translated that into a lowercase a. So now I'm going to push a 6. There it is. I'm going to push the up arrow.
Is that an ASCII?
I don't know if it's ASCII or not. I think because it might be Unicode. I don't know.
Hit the return key. Hit the return key. Get in there. Hit the return key. Yeah, that's ASCII. That's 13's ASCII.
Oh, okay. Nice. Okay.
Did you enter return?
So you can.
They're different.
That was return. Here's enter. Oops. Enter actually committed the record.
Yeah, you got it set.
FileMaker interrupted the enter key.
Yeah, interrupted the enter key. Yeah. Okay.
So let's take the code. Look at the code here.
Kyle confirms keys are in ASCII.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know. So here's our custom JavaScript, and everything down here is me converting everything from code to actually what it was for your benefit. It's in there as a reference now. Anybody that downloads this file. But here's the actual JavaScript that ran, and you notice we're doing it on the ready function, and that's why as soon as this code runs, as soon as the web page loads, it just immediately works, right? It just runs constantly. As long in FileMaker, it runs constantly as long as the web viewer is active. That's the gotcha, right?
Wait.
So this is capturing. Go ahead.
The X and Y coordinates that were being displayed are still in the web viewer. Is that correct? Or are they actually?
Yes.
Okay, because it was going really.
Well, let's look, because here's X0, and it's not to the left side of my screen, right? It's just the left side of the web viewer.
I'm talking about these right here. Is that the web viewer is just right here, right? This is just the web viewer. Right?
Yeah. Let me scroll out of it and go up and down. Yeah. There's the bottom. Here's the top.
So this is in FileMaker. So these are the coordinates that are getting sent to FileMaker. So you're sending that many perform scripts that fast, right? Go back to your code. I was reading.
Oh yeah, look how fast that is. Yeah, absolutely.
But each time but back up. Each time this updates, FileMaker is running a script to update that. Correct? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty damn fast. Because
it's very fast. Yeah. Okay. So that depends upon how heavy your FileMaker script is, right? Here's what gets ran with that. Here's what that's doing every single time.
Hmm.
So I'm bringing in the object coming in from JavaScript. I'm parsing 3 values out of it. I'm actually converting the key character to something that makes English sense, right? And as long as I have values here for X and Y, I'm putting it not only on the screen, but I also have a global variable that's being populated. We'll look at that in a minute. Here's what gets presented on screen, which is the key code plus the English conversion thing going on.
Yep.
And then, of course, to actually get it to draw, I actually have to refresh by object name. In other words, it does not update. So if we go back and bring up the data viewer and move around inside of here, you can see the X and Y coordinates. Let me make
Okay,
it
so
smaller
those are
here.
those three. These are actually those are merge variables. Is that what those are down there? Merge variables, or are they actually?
Yes. Yeah, they probably are. Yeah, they're merged.
Yeah, merge. Yeah, those historically, regardless of how you're setting them, will not update via script unless you tell them explicitly to update. So.
Yeah. So it's refreshing after every call, but it's nice and fast for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if I push keys on a keyboard, all of that updates nice and fast too, and move the mouse around. So it's very responsive, and that's why I was excited with Pac-Man and Space Invaders, because everything I had attempted before that was just so logy. It just crawled.
Yep.
It's terrible to press a key 3 times and FileMaker only recognizes it once.
Oh yeah, that's a showstopper.
But with jQuery, it was instantaneous, extremely responsive, and I got all excited. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at 22 past the hour. We need to land the airplane. This is your captain speaking.
Yep.
Please return your tray tables to upright position. Margaret, are we ready to land the airplane?
I think we are, but you need to share your screen to do it.
I need to share my screen to do it. So real quick, as a reminder, tomorrow we're going to continue. And then here we have the new bonus day right here coming up, the extra bonus training day. That will also be a double for Leland. So he will be doing the live stream at 1 o'clock, and then the paid training, if you've signed up for that React Native training, that'll be at 3 o'clock Pacific. So it's pretty late Eastern time. The good news is it is recorded. And Leland's going to have to take some caffeine because that'll be a double in one day. That's a lot of presenting. With that, we will catch everyone tomorrow for day 6 of the training. Have a good one.
Here we go.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.